Good evening. Good evening. I'm Larry Antonatis, Vice President of the Society for Contemporary Art. It's a pleasure to have you all here tonight as we welcome the artist collective New Red Order. Before we proceed with tonight's artist talk, I'd like to highlight some exciting upcoming programming from the SCA for the winter and spring seasons. We have a lineup of engaging artist talks, including Regina Jose Galindo from Guatemala City on March 6th, Japanese ceramists Hosono Hitomi and Yamaguchi Mio in the Radical Clay exhibition on March 23rd, Brooklyn-based artist, writer, and educator Stefani Jemison on April 24th, and John Knight, who will open his installation on the Bloom Family Terrace on May 4th, all taking place here in Fullerton Hall at the museum starting at 6 p.m. Following each program, we invite you to join us for dinners and receptions to engage with the artist and fellow SCA members. Additionally, the SCA's 2024 biennial benefit, SCA Collector Sale, Who Do You Love? An art auction and glam bash is scheduled for Thursday, June 6, 2024. The night will feature music, entertainment, food, and drink, celebrating Chicago's vibrant arts community, and an old school silent auction featuring artworks by artists that you love. The night will be hosted by Freeman's Heinemann at their Chicago headquarters. We are excited to see you there. Detailed information will be released soon, and we eagerly anticipate your support and presence. If you haven't already, we encourage you to become a member of the SCA in order to access a wide range of benefits, including curator-led tours, private exhibition viewings, and exclusive happy hours at local art spaces. The SCA is open to all, and we offer a limited number of reduced-rate memberships, which you can apply for on our website. Your support is vital in helping us fulfill our mission, and we hope you'll consider joining the SCA family. Lastly, as a nonprofit organization, the SCA is actively seeking new supporters, whether individuals or corporate partners, to sponsor our upcoming public program and members events. Without further delay, I'd like to invite our SCA board member and co-chair of the SCA Benefit, Zach Smith, to introduce our special guests. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thanks, Larry, and thanks everyone for being here tonight. It's our privilege to introduce the artist collective, New Red Order. New Red Order operates as a public secret society, collaborating with informants to create exhibitions, videos, and performances that interrogate and redirect subjective and material relationships to indigeneity. Using humor, their work navigates the complexities of Indigenous experience, exploring the contradictions and aspirations embedded within the myths, dreams, and political foundations of the Americas. Their boundary-breaking work challenges conventional norms, prompting audiences to confront uncomfortable truths and reconsider their views on history, politics, and art, sparking vital dialogue on pressing social issues. Facilitated by core contributors Adam Khalil Ojibwe, Zach Khalil Ojibwe, and Jackson Paulus Plinkett, who are here tonight, New Red Order has showcased their work worldwide at Artist Space, the Museum of Modern Art, the Kunsthalle Charlottenburg, and the Whitney Biennial, among many others. Tonight, we are honored to have Adam, Zach, and Jackson with us. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hello, my name is Stevie D, licensed attorney at law. I'm speaking now on behalf of the New Red Order. We have a few words we'd like to share with you today. Increasingly, one might expect that a person sensitive to our settler colonial situation would acknowledge that we are now occupying a space that rests and operates within a likely unceded territory, that this place has always been Turtle Island, a network of intersecting Indigenous movements. If this acknowledgement is performed by one claiming some Indigenous ancestry, one might expect assertions of Indigenous nationhood. This performance, claiming a wealth of selective specificity, a privilege of naming, owning a continual connection to a particular space, may cause unease and alienate, as it opens up questions of legitimacy in terms of claiming lineage as proprietary and of claiming any land for our own. it may be slightly unnerving. But instead of simply posing the acknowledgement of our settler colonial reality at the outset and then getting on with the program, can we delay the conclusion of this acknowledgement and resulting acceptance for now? Please? Now, we ask you to join in acknowledging Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. We, and others, further acknowledge that this place was built upon legacies of unchecked exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this space and that which it touches is located. This is in solidarity with all Indigenous peoples, here and beyond, who continue to live under siege, surveillance, and colonial structural violence on their own occupied lands and waters. This acknowledgement should not function as acceptance or closure, but as a call in to commit to reconfigure our notions about ourselves and to take on the responsibility to dismantle the ongoing effects of settler colonialism. Thank you. Enjoy the show.
Hi. Hey. First off, thanks so much for having us, and thanks for everyone for coming out. Ani Bojo, Shingwak Indigenicas, Bawating and Donjiba. My name's Adam Khalil. I'm a filmmaker and artist, and a core contributor to New Red Order. And it's really cool to be talking with you all here. Me and my brother Zach grew up in Bawating, or what's currently called Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. So it's always nice to be back in the neighborhood. Maybe I'll pass it to you, Zach.
Yeah, Anai Bojo, Miskwanebe ni Indigenicas, Bawating and Donjiba, Wapazeshi Dodep. Hi, my name is Zach Khalil. I'm a filmmaker and artist, core contributor to New Red Order, as well as Adam's brother. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you all for coming.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. It's been a while since I've been back. I'm Jackson Paulus. I'm originally from Alaska. I'm Tlingit, part of the Daklawedi clan. Gunalchish for having us. I guess one of the things that brought us together is the recognition of having to negotiate being an informant. As Indigenous artists, we're often called upon to be informants in our own communities, similar to the ways in which informants work with anthropologists. And now as artists in settler colonial states, we are still called upon to be informants, often on other Indigenous communities who may not be our own. So I think one of the things that brought us together is how to work with that dynamic and that desire for indigeneity in order to find ways to counter the continual extractive nature of that relationship.
Yeah, and I think to pick up on that, I think in our particular moment now, too, in this like sort of period of existential and environmental catastrophe, I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a sort of resurgence of interest in Indigenous epistemologies and worldviews, right? Maybe as a way out of some of our current predicaments, and that interest in those epistemologies can have really negative consequences, right? If it happens in a very extractive way. But I think a big part of what we try to think about as New Red Order as well is if, as Native artists functioning in these settler colonial spheres, universities, museums, if we're always called upon to be informants, and if that sort of relationship is maybe can't be avoided, how can it be channeled or reshaped to actually give us and our communities agency instead of just extracting things from our communities?
So yeah. Should we talk about the improved order of the red man? Well, yeah, so kind of part of NRO's formulation, there's one part is acknowledging our own informant status, and then also calling on other people to join in acknowledging their own informant status in terms of their own desire for indigeneity. So New Red Order emerges out of a contradistinction from the Improved Order of the Red Man, this is the original charter. It's a secret society that got started with the Sons of Liberty around the Boston Tea Party, where revolting colonists dressed up as Haudenosaunee people to throw tea over the harbor in revolt. So this idea that one of the founding origins of the United States of America is actually this idea of wanting to replace or embody indigenous people. And that kind of desire is manifested still to this day. And instead of calling that desire out and kind of shaming it for what it is, we're more interested in how to rechannel that desire towards indigenous future and growth.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the Improved Order of Red Men, it's maybe easy to sort of laugh at them and maybe not take it too seriously. It's a secret society that had a lot of power, actually, in the United States and New York in particular, kind of like akin to the Freemasons. But there were multiple, it was actually a major political force for a really long time, especially in Tammany Hall in New York. And there were multiple U.S. presidents who were also members, including Warren G. Harding and Theodore Roosevelt. And at their secret society meetings, at their wigwams, as they call it, they would dress up as sort of cliche Native Americans and sort of fake plain-style headdresses, and sort of make deals and political agreements. So as much as seems like a sort of ridiculous thing to poke fun at, it was actually also a really serious political force that has had really deep consequences for people in the United States.
And just to keep things extra weird, the Improved Order of the Red Man still exists, as well as its sorority version, the Degree of Pocahontas, and they're headquartered in Waco, Texas. So if you ever happen to be in the area, go say hi.
Yeah, they appear to be a vanishing tribe, as with other German groups. Indianers. There was actually one in my hometown where I grew up, and I was a little bit confused about the misspelling and why I had to encounter this group. And it wasn't until I got into their halls and found out more about their regalia, what they were doing, that it kind of informed my own participancy in contemporary art and performing my own indigeneity and a kind of different awareness in terms of linking that to the foundational violence of this nation state.
Yeah, to Jackson's point, though, there used to be millions of members when they were at their height, and today there's about 15,000 left. And again, of course, they're still active. And I think for us, the Improved Order of the Red Men really demonstrates just how deeply embedded playing Indian is, as was mentioned earlier, in the myths, dreams, and political foundations of the United States. And so New Red Order ourselves, if we're acknowledging that desire is so deeply entrenched that it can't be avoided, then we want to think about how to rechannel it into productive ends. And so instead of continuing the Improved Order of the Red Men, we wanted to start our own group in contradistinction. And instead of a secret society, we wanted to create a public secret society called the New Red Order.
And yeah, maybe a public secret is something we stole from Michael Tausig, who kind of talks about public secrets as things that we all collectively know to be true, but don't often discuss or acknowledge. So the fact that we're all occupying indigenous territories is the kind of public secret that we're kind of sniffing around. Plus, it's also kind of funny because it was a real secret society, public secret. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, but in terms of the New Red Order, everyone is welcome to join. Open membership. Yeah, we're constantly recruiting, so maybe we'll play a little video.
Start really living. Experience clarity. Act with confidence. Attract abundance. Be a part of the solution. Leave behind a better world. Never settle. On some level, we all want to feel this way, but sometimes in our globalized, capitalist, settler colonial society, it feels impossible. Which is why the New Red Order is developing a dynamic system to help our accomplices achieve all this and more. This free introductory video, The New Red Order, Never Settle, will tell you what you need to know to take control of your life today.
It's a story of support.
It's a story of mentoring.
It's a story of collective liberation.
We are encouraging each other
motivating each other.
So that we can be stronger together through knowledge.
The New Red Order, or NRO, is a public secret society dedicated to expanding Indigenous agency and achieving decolonization, which brings about the repatriation of Indigenous land and life.
But what does that have to do with me or you?
Are you a settler? Am I a settler? This is making me feel bad. Does it make you feel bad? What is settler colonialism? Settler colonialism is a distinct type of colonialism that functions through the replacement of indigenous populations with an invasive settler society that, instead of leaving, stayed. One of the largest obstructions to indigenous growth is an excessive, some might say inappropriate, desire towards indigeneity. This desire pervades the myths, dreams, and political foundations of the so-called Americas. But how does this desire manifest? Romanticization. Appropriation. Commodification. Cultural. Erasure. Can these desires, despite their danger, be harnessed, converted, channeled to promote indigenous futures? You can have a place. Never settle. There are many roles for settler colonists at the New Red Order. We always need financial, material, intellectual, legal, illegal, and extra-legal support to achieve collective liberation. Join us today to create a better tomorrow today. Because we can't know where we're going unless we know where we've been. And we won't know where we've been unless we look to the past for the future. Because the future is starting to feel a lot like the present. And we all know you'd do anything to escape that.
So again, that's 1-888 New Red 1. It's an active hotline. Really encourage you all to call up, or newredorder.org. We're really big fans of serious jokes, so I'm serious about that, though. Like, it's real. Please call. Please go online. We need more informants, and we need more accomplices.
And also maybe just to sweeten the pot, that was like the teaser video for a longer 50-minute, 50, kind of, we call it the program. And that kind of gets people up to speed. So if you're enticed, reach out and ask for the program to get with the program.
Yeah, I guess one of the elements of New Red Order is realizing the kind of pull for the performance of one's own indigeneity, wanting to flip that informant script so that others can form on their own desire for indigeneity. So in doing so, we've found that proxy, allowing others to speak on our behalf, despite the problematics of that, and working through the problematics of that, can be beneficial. We've worked with Jim Fletcher, who himself has been involved in Plain Indian, and has now become our kind of spokesman and host, thinking through the problematics of host-guest relationships. And often people have difficulty in finding out how to work for Native people and on behalf of them without getting in the way. But we found that it also makes sense to emphasize their own agency in the process.
And also that the message can be understood differently if it's non-Native people expressing these concerns. And that's one of the advantages of this kind of proxy informant dynamic that we've found.
Certainly. And I think the push for recruitment for us is sort of also just an acknowledgement that although that desire for indigeneity can have really negative consequences for people, that it can come from a sincere place, and that also that we're going to move forward into the future together, that given the numbers in this country, that Native people can't do it alone, right? And that we might need to work with other people. In order to do that, we might need to share aspects of our worldviews and epistemologies, but that has to happen in a reciprocal way, right, and not in an extractive way. Which I think sort of like begs the obvious question, like we're recruiting people. What are we recruiting people for, right? What's the goal of all this? And I think the goal of NRO's practice in our recruitment drive is the rematriation or return of all Indigenous land and life. So we can share aspects of our epistemologies and our worldviews, but that's what we essentially need in return.
Yeah, and so we've made a heavy push to, in each installation, provide a recruitment station so that people can find out more, learn how to be engaged. This is the first iteration from the Toronto Biennial in 2019, curated by Candace Hopkins. This is another variation. So, yeah. Toward the recruitment, Native people might have to act as cover. For any agendas that might take place. But we also have, what's next? What are we recruiting people for? Returning all Indigenous land and life, right? We have an excerpt lined up. We'll skip to that.
The repatriation of all Indigenous land, that's not realistic. That's not realistic.
This disturbing footage shows a man using an aerosol can to torch a DMV.
But look at the state of reality. Do you want to be realistic? Do you want to live your life in a realistic way? I certainly don't.
These are not rhetorical questions meant as an abdication of responsibility, but instead an acknowledgement of reality. The incommensurability of this settler colonial reality calls for action. Action to commit crimes. Crimes against reality.
So what the NRO really did for me is give me the ability to create things that I imagined. So it kind of gave me like a sense of purpose.
What was really surprising to me was the simplicity of the techniques.
And obviously, if you're able to take things that you imagine and put them into reality, then you can actually live a life that you want to live.
It's not illegal, it's extra legal.
I understood. This is magic. This is la philosophie sauvage. Now I can create anything.
The repatriation and rematriation of all Indigenous land and life, which for us, it comes from Eve Tuck and Kay Wang Yang's sort of foundational essay, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, which is also maybe a sort of foundational essay for the land back movement in general, and is sort of a guiding principle in New Red Order's practice. I think it's important to think about, for us, the way in which advocating for the rematriation of all Indigenous land and life to many people sounds like a provocation and not a possibility. And I think a big part of our practice is trying to change people's thinking around that, sort of acknowledging that we need to create the conditions of possibility for that to exist in the first place. A sort of example is thinking about Manifest Destiny itself, how Manifest Destiny was sort of imagined as an eventuality, and it's people's belief in its inevitability created our contemporary reality today. In the same sense, we believe that belief in the rematriation of all indigenous land and life will make that our reality in the future. And one way of thinking about that is this idea of savage philosophy.
Yes, we're just scaffolding onto savage philosophy to figure out how to commit crimes against reality.
It's pretty basic, right?
I guess it's an acceptance of the power of belief when, it was formerly thought that, or continually thought that it's only the savages who believe. So we were really informed by Christopher Bracken, who wrote a book called Magical Criticism on the Discourse of Savage Philosophy. This lines up the next video. We'll get into it.
Do you believe in Indians?
Do they believe in you?
When did you first learn about Indians?
Did you grow up knowing Indians in your town, or just Indians on TV?
Which did you find more fascinating as a child? Indians or dinosaurs? Why?
Have you ever visited a reservation?
Have you ever longed to meet an Indian?
Why?
Have you ever asked yourself, what do I want from Indian people?
What do you think Indian people want from you?
Have you ever wanted to be savage?
Wild?
Free?
What are savages for?
Do you ever feel guilty about American history?
Do you worry about the environment?
The economy?
The country?
Current events?
Crippling depression?
Globalism?
Got you down?
Do you suffer from existential ennui?
Do you ever feel alone?
Pessimistic?
Burnt out?
Cynical?
Hopeless?
Ever wish you could just disconnect?
Or connect with something bigger?
Did you ever see Poltergeist?
Do you ever wonder if your house is built on an Indian burial ground?
Have you ever wondered what savages are for? What are savages for?
What is savage philosophy?
What is savage philosophy? And what can it do for you?
And what can it do for your business? Before we get into savage philosophy, let's first address the word savage. It's pretty loaded. I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that I'm operating as a representative for the New Red Order when I say savage. So I'm not saying savage. I'm saying savage by proxy. But now that we got that out of the way, what are savages? And what are they for? The savage is a living sign that stands for us, but an earlier us, an image that reflects our origins back, a deferred presence. Savage, as a sign, creates a belief in progress, improvement, advancement. It offers what we could not otherwise know about ourselves. Where do savages come from? Dreamed up in discourse, the first people are made in the image of the poet. Poets are made in the image of the savage. Savage philosophers are poets who have survived into the age of positivism. Language is the flower of the mouth. When the word is called the mouth's flower and its blossom, we hear the sound of language rising like the earth. What is savage philosophy? Savage philosophy operates through discourse, which is not merely an instrument for the communication of thought, but an occasion for the deployment of forces. It asserts that signs have a real and physical connection with things. Signs take part in things instead of taking their place. If magic confuses representation with reality, savage philosophy makes representation into reality. Brighter stars will rise on some voyager of the future than shine on us. The dreams of magic may one day be the waking realities of science. Philosophers are comparable to savages because they pay too much attention to what words mean, thinking too little about how they are used, or too much attention to how they are used and too little to what they mean. Either way, splitting and confusing the ideal and the real. Errors. Which errors offer the most advantages when the world has gone savage? The realist in the era of imperialism still thinks as savages do. And what savages do, above all, is to confuse signs with things.
So savage philosophy, pretty simple, right? Pretty simple. But a really basic way of thinking about it is again, the idea that discourse deploys forces, that representations make reality. And to think about that in terms of our goal of the rematriation of all indigenous land and life, sort of the ways in which we want to instrumentalize or have instrumentalized the idea of savage philosophy is through our sort of ongoing and iterative project called Give It Back. And this has had many iterations, but fundamentally began from research. We talk about the need to return all indigenous land and life. And I think the really important thing to note is that the return of indigenous land and life is already happening. Is that there's already a lot of non-native people in the United States and Canada who have voluntarily rematriated or returned land to indigenous people. So in many ways, this project started for us by finding all of these examples. They tend not to rise up to the level of national news. They tend to be local news stories and happen sort of in isolated areas, sort of spread across the country and in many different ways. There's many different ways legally and financially to give land back to indigenous people. But the first iteration of this was at a project that we did at Artist Space. Maybe one of you want to elaborate on that project.
Yeah, at Artist Space, we took the opportunity to utilize their storefront as a Give It Back office. The project first manifested, if I could say that, at Simon Fraser University at an online exhibition. So there was a storefront exhibition. We transferred that into Artist Space in New York. And we presented them as real estate examples. And many people were kind of confused when they walked by because they didn't realize that Artist Space had not turned into an actual real estate company. Despite the fancy lettering up above and the font.
People were coming in complaining, like, I'm trying to buy an apartment, this doesn't help me at all.
But then also, people who did know it was art, we thought that all the examples that we had collected, and I think at that point it was maybe 1825, something like that, they assumed that we invented them all, that we made them up, which was not the case. There were thoroughly researched things that had actually happened and had actually occurred. And so that sort of sense of disbelief, it kind of gets to what I was talking about earlier about needing to create the conditions of possibility, right? Where people didn't even believe that it was possible that non-native people would give land back to native people. And the sort of response of disbelief that project was received with sort of encouraged us to dig in deeper and to think about ways of presenting the individuals who did this in a way that makes it seem true, because it is. So that sort of started the next iteration of our Give It Back project, which was to create basically a documentary of sorts. You could even think about it as branded content, maybe, sort of promoting the practice of giving it back by making portraits of the individuals who did this work. And unless y'all have something to add, maybe we play the teaser?
So this is the right thing to do. It absolutely is the right thing to do. It's always been the right thing to do. So I move that we authorize the mayor to sign the agreement to transfer APN 405-001 to the Wiat tribe and authorize the mayor to sign the grant deed to complete the transfer.
When this happened, I think the emotions and depth of feelings and the range of emotions were really intense. She basically talked to me about the building and the desire they had to transfer the ownership of the building. I was shocked. It was truly unexpected. So that's how it started.
So this for me is personal. It's very important. And I'm grateful that we're all doing the right thing. And I'm just thankful so much that all of you are out here. Thank you.
Yes, abolition is kind of like intoxicating. The process of like getting there, wow, it really has a lot of feelings.
So there's a short teaser for the longer Give It Back Crimes Against Realty video, which was presented at the World's Unfair, which maybe we'll get into in a little bit here. But maybe I just want to spend a little bit of time and talk about the individual examples featured in the film. There are sort of 4 Give It Back examples featured, 2 from city governments, and one from a nonprofit and one from an individual as well. The city of Eureka, California, returned an island to the Wiyot tribe, and the city of Oakland returned land to the Segurite Land Trust. We also, in terms of an arts context, some of y'all might know about Yale Union, an arts institution in Portland, returned their building, or gave their building, to the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. And the third example we featured, which is Christine Sleater, who's an author, an educator, who didn't possess the land that she had inherited from her grandmother, but possessed the value from that land, and took the time to calculate what that value was and return it to the Ute tribe. And so those are just 4 of many different examples. There are more and more every year. And for us, it was important to sort of show not just city governments, but also individuals and institutions. Sort of thinking that the rematriation of all Indigenous land and life isn't something that we're going to wait for the federal government to do, but it's something that we all sort of have to pick up and start, and that it's something that's already happening. And if you just do a little bit of research, you'll find more and more examples popping up over and over again. But this video was originally presented at a large public art exhibition, which we did called the World's Unfair, which maybe one of y'all want to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, so we're trying to figure out a container to kind of present all of these Give It Back examples, to also promote and normalize the practice of giving it back. And what better container than detorning a World's Fair? So it was kind of a series of public installations at an empty lot in Queens, New York, that's going to be developed. But for a while, there was the potential hope that maybe it too could have been given back.
And knowing that a lot of these World's Fairs were also containers for ideas of advancement or progress. At the same time, there were containers for Native people, both ancestors, human remains, but also living people who eventually became ancestors. So I guess knowing that context, especially in New York, and also that it is definitely connected to here with Franz Boas and others, the Columbia exhibition and the World's Unfair, and knowing that this was a possibility to imagine a new creation of what it might mean if the natives never left, and what it might mean to advance the politics of Give It Back in that scenario. So here are a couple installation shots.
Yeah, and I think this sort of World's Unfair project is also, which sort of had this manifestation in Queens, New York with Creative Time, was also sort of the result of a few years of research, also working in concert with the Counterpublic Triennial in St. Louis. And again, some collaboration with the St. Louis Art Museum, which was, another institution like this one that was built for the World's Fairs. Yeah, as Jackson said, I think it's really interesting for us to think about how those events have been used as tools to dispossess Indigenous people of our lands and bodies, and how we could deturn that idea to point towards something different.
Yeah, here we're still working through the documentation of that because it closed recently. But we have, that was really a site of imagining of how we might take up space in a different kind of way with our own agency. and kind of deterring with the kind of overrepresentation of Native people, allowing different kind of performances, Raven Chacon, many others, providing these platforms. We also had, Jim Fletcher as host, and an animatronic tree and beaver.
I think also something to note is that a big part of our practice is advocating for the return of Indigenous land and life in a public way, but also behind the scenes trying to make it happen, right? And so for the World's Unfair, we also worked with Emily Johnson, Catalyst, and Lenny Lenape-Aquayok, a group of Lenape matriarchs, to point to donating land and or resources to them. So many people in New York don't know whose land they're on in the first place. And so for us, there's also a real opportunity to not just raise awareness, but also funds and ideally land to go back to an Indigenous people. And in St. Louis, in collaboration with a lot of people, we've also been working towards similar goals behind the scenes. And maybe to close it out, unless you all have anything to add.
Well, maybe just that the World's Unfair was also this container to kind of enact savage philosophy by also kind of setting the terms of a political horizon that could become real by just kind of espousing it and putting it out into the world. So there was like a public advertising campaign. The tree and beaver, Dexter and Ash, were kind of having a dialogue about the origins of private property and how to kind of undo those origins, and also thinking about crimes against reality and like the basis of legal systems kind of stemming from private property as being like one of the original sins or something. And also like using that opportunity of a container of something like a World's Fair, but a World's Unfair, to not just be about land back, but to also enact convenings, meetings, and gatherings to actually make that happen. So it was like people that were featured in this 30-minute documentary we made, Crimes Against Realty, actually all came out. And it was super meaningful because also a lot of these instances happen in isolation because there's such specificity to each situation and each parcel of land. But also there's so much to be learned from each other. So even like putting these people in dialogue with each other, sharing weird, esoteric legalese documents that then could get repurposed as opposed to spending $80,000 on legal fees to reinvent the wheel. And kind of like building out this network of give it backers to kind of expedite and make this process easier, because giving land back, giving property back, or trying to undo property is incredibly difficult because the infrastructure that maintains property is set up to not allow that to happen.
Yeah, and I think maybe the other thing just to consider also about this idea of returning all Indigenous land and life is like what happens next, right? What happens afterwards? What does that actually mean? Where do we go? And I can't speak for other people in terms of answering that question or other Indigenous groups. But I think for myself, and I think for New Red Order, it's not about kicking everybody out of what's currently called America. It's about forming new forms of kinship and reciprocity based on the land and its original inhabitants. And that's fundamentally what this work is trying to do and trying to show that it's possible. And maybe sort of on that thread, we sort of have a closing video we can show, which sort of gets at some of those ideas, which just to share a little bit of context about it, again, thinking about this idea of World's Fairs, this was originally created for the St. Louis Art Museum, who had spent at least a couple $1 million restoring a sort of proto-cinematic panoramic painting. So sort of like a 8-foot tall, 380-foot long painting that was made in the 1850s by an amateur archaeologist or a grave robber who spent 12 years of his life digging up and raising burial mounds and collecting ancestors and their funerary objects and exhibiting them, also at a World's Fair. And he sort of took all these contemporaneous notes and made this enormous painting, which was presented, again, like as a scroll in a sort of proto-cinematic fashion with lighting effects and narration. He'd talk about his adventures. And so for this piece, Give It Back Stage Theory, we were interested in representing that work, that painting, in a way similar to the way that it was presented originally as a scroll with a narration, but with a narration which advocated for something very different than it originally did. And so maybe we'll play that and then open up to questions.
Just a warning, it's a lot of strobes, so if anyone doesn't want to be subjected to strobes or can. Yeah.
Hi. From your talk, I think the intent's really clear with the work. I wonder if you could expound upon the process of making what your individual practices are, how those come in collectively, if you still have individual practices, and, like, i.e., is one of you a graphic designer, a video maker, things like this?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's also tough to organize this talk because it's not that much time, so we wanted to kind of like talk more about the ideas, so thanks for that. My background's more in film, and like I've done documentaries and narrative films, but also like I kind of like graphic design, so I'm a closeted graphic designer.
My background's also primarily in film, but also sound and music, so electronic music in particular. Maybe the other thing to note too, just to make really clear, is that we're the core contributors to New Red Order, but there's many members, and we work in many different collaborative constellations with a really large group of other artists and technicians too, such as something to know.
Yeah, I'm Jackson again. I came to it through carving. My father was a carver up in Alaska, so I grew up carving behind ropes for busloads of tourists that would come in off the cruise ships and kind of performing my own culture. My father was more comfortable with it. I kind of had a different kind of resistance against the performance of one culture, which kind of led to this dialectic, which informed a lot of the New Red Order kind of platforming. But yeah, I have a background in sculpture, experimental installation, dabbled in video and sound. But yeah.
I wanted to ask a question. Thanks for that, guys. How did you guys arrive at the tone and style of the works you make? You know, there's so many different like self-help and corporate culture, and how did you guys come to that form for the works that you were going to make, I guess is my question.
You want the truth?
Yes. Always.
I mean, maybe this is TMI, but Zach and I worked at a high-end bar and bat mitzvah company for a while. So high-end bar and bat mitzvah videography company. So actually, like, a lot of like the commercial aesthetics kind of seeped in that way. Yeah, partially that.
Yeah, I think we were also interested in the kind of ingestion and ability to kind of keep ingesting. From an indigenous position, an indigenous epistemology is said to be something that is counter to an acceptance of property. Like natives have no notions of property, just as oftentimes, perhaps erroneously in some cases, they're said to have no notion of art. So an embrace of that growth mindset also, I think, informed this kind of willingness to grow, like similar to the, contemporary indigenous art is the oldest and fastest growing contemporary art in the Western Hemisphere. So the simultaneous acceptance of that and promotion, I think, was core to this formation of what are the possibilities for indigenous growth and how could one enact that?
I think also maybe it's also like an aspiration not to just be contained by art, but to also kind of appropriate and adopt these forms that exist outside of that, or could be legible and read outside of that. That's why we loathe being called an art collective and prefer public secret society, because we could be like a political think tank, a religious cult, a self-help movement, or any or all of those things. And then, yeah, I think we're also kind of obsessed with thinking about the audience in terms of how we author works, and that kind of advertising self-help vernacular is also obsessed with the audience in terms of how one will receive what's being put out there. And that's just kind of a fun dynamic to play within. We're always talking about like being unsettling in some kind of way, but also like welcoming, or welcome as warning is this kind of phrase that keeps coming up for us.
Totally, and recognizing that the desire for indigeneity and these epistemologies does come from an actual, genuine place to change one's life and consciousness, and to think about all the different sort of, visual and cinematic vernaculars of self-help to reference that. But I think also, we're always balancing tone too. And obviously humor is a really important part of that, and satire. But I find that the longer we work, for myself personally, I find it more necessary to be sincere, to balance out that satire with sincerity. And a big part of the Give It Back Crimes Against Realty project, where we're actually, following and interviewing the people who actually gave land back, it still oscillates wildly tonally, but when we're actually like hearing what these people did and what it meant to them in their lives and what it meant to the people, the communities that they interacted with, that's like deadly serious. And I think being able to move back and forth in between those registers keeps people on their toes a little bit in a way that I think is hopefully productive. I think oftentimes with Native art or Native film especially, people sort of enter in sort of knowing what they're getting or having an idea that they already know what they're getting. And for us, we really kind of want to put the audience on unstable footing and to question who's saying what and for what reason, because I think that it encourages a level of criticality that is going to benefit us all in the future, hopefully.
I also think that embrace of the self-help also arose kind of naturally in some ways from the conversations with informants and realizing that a lot of people have apprehension that if they learn a certain amount about Indigenous people, then there might be a retraction because they fear that they have insufficient information or they shouldn't do anything without knowing more. So a lot of those conversations had a self-help aspect also in terms of gaining accomplices. Once we have the initial recruitment push, then people are interested, they want to learn how to do more, but how can we convince them to and encourage them to commit fully? And I think part of that commitment involves an embrace of an acceptance of that this is also for yourself. It's not something that has to be removed entirely, because if you remove it entirely, then you might not actually be committing your full self to the process. You might be just doing in a token kind of way. And Jim Fletcher, who we work with in one of those initial conversations and interviews, which became very key to our process as well, that collaboration, had a great line, which is, arose out of an apology for having played Indian, but it was an improvised apology in 2017 at this event called Informants at Artist Space. And the line was, "It's not about me, but for me it is." So I think, it's something we continually think about. And I think as to Zach's point, we're constantly arriving, and the oscillation is very important.
Well, maybe also it's like a part of how we developed this idea of being willful informants was also this kind of burden of edutainment or pedagogy that was placed on us as artists constantly. And instead of trying to negate that or push that away, actually embracing that fully and having that be part of the form of what we're working with. So I like edutainment.
Thanks for the talk. I recently got to really enjoy that piece that Elvia Wilk wrote about your practice at Counterpublic, and it was really informative. And I have a question about how you manage to kind of walk the tightrope of maintaining and developing an Indigenous epistemology for the future without falling into the trap of being authentic in a way, or also co-optation on the other side. I think there's a lot of conversations about indigeneity happening outside of the United States and, in Palestine right now, and how the question of authenticity is used and weaponized for deeply nefarious and violent purposes, and how your own practice is able to kind of navigate around kind of the death trap that something like identity as a fixed notion imposes. I think that's a really beautiful part of what it is you do. But I'm interested in how you conceive of indigeneity past authenticity, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that was part of the original impetus for embracing and trying to figure out how to flip the informant status, knowing that if we are informants, we're often called upon to talk about people other than our home, like our homelands, or people who are not from our original tribe or nation. So acknowledging our complicity out front was one of the ways of initializing that platforming. So that's one aspect, just from the beginning.
I think too, it's maybe something to consider about New Right Order too, is that, you know, there is like the promise of sharing indigenous epistemologies and worldviews. And not that we say it, but I think the assumption that that means authentic, traditional epistemologies and worldviews, right? And I think in some ways it's like a bit of a bait and switch for us, maybe. We're not the arbiters of how that information or knowledge can be shared, right? And just to be really clear, like that isn't something that we share in any of our practices as New Right Order. We don't ever, show or share ceremonial practices. And we don't even necessarily, claim that we will. But I think when people engage with the idea of indigeneity, they engage with this idea, this authentic idea of the imaginary Indian, right? And for us, I think that's, it's an inescapable burden. And so we want to think about how we can instrumentalize that as an incentive. But I think the important thing to consider there too is that like, this is the very beginning of a project in proposition that I hope doesn't end with us, right? And that is more of a question than it is an answer, but it's a welcome is warning. It's an invitation to engage with Indigenous people and people's own desire for authentic indigeneity. And that if that engagement continues, then I think that idea of what they actually want starts to shift, because the imaginary Indian gets replaced with real people, right? And this like magical spirituality idea gets replaced with real interactions in the ways that it alters our psychology in ways that we have relationships with each other. So I think it's a tool, and it's something to use, but not to lean into too much too. Great question, by the way. Thank you.
I think this will be our last question. Thanks.
So two sort of related questions. One is, do all of you, or do you make art separate from this? And how do you understand that practice relative to this? And also, have you ever had to ask someone to leave the organization because they were doing something that simply didn't square with your beliefs for it? And what were those conditions like?
I think New Right Order is a safe space for unsafe ideas.
Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, we all make work separately and with other collaborators, and Zach and I have a film practice that's separate from this, and also like the other people who are kind of in this revolving door of being a part of New Right Order in terms of their artistic skill sets or the like time and care and thought that they want to invest and put into this. We try to keep it really open in a sense where it's like, I don't know, it gets tricky because there could be like a false narrative where it's like, oh yeah, we all just figured it out together, but also like we're kind of steering the thing to some extent.
That's sort of what I wanted to know.
Yeah, or like creating a framework that then we're not precious about it changing after the fact, but just also in collaboration in general, without a framework, it can devolve into dust pretty quickly from my experience.
Yeah, and I guess it's permeable in terms of allowing people in. And as Adam mentioned, there is this kind of filtering and negotiation process, and kind of depends on that person's level of engagement and willingness and commitment. But being permeable, it does also permeate and influence our individual practices since we've been working together, I think.
And like our individual practices brought us to New Right Order too, I think, to be really clear about it. Like me and Adam's first feature film we made, A Not to Say, which is about our community in Bawating, like kind of could be called a documentary and got out into the world in a bigger way than we ever expected. And it was a very conflicting experience, sort of being thrust into that informant role for the first time. And this practice very much emerged to counter that in a way. But also, like, me and Adam continue to make films separately and are currently working on a feature film about rematriating ancestors, returning ancestors from museums and university institutions. So the work is different but very intertwined too in a way, but sort of reaches different audiences, I would imagine.
Cool. Please join me in giving Adam, Zach, and Jackson one more round of applause. Thank you all.